EU and Turkey deal, because I'm a bit confused. Is it true that only Greece is called to recognize Turkey as a safe country of origin, while the rest of the member states are not going forward with such an action? Thank you.
Let's move to the refugee crisis. Natasha's coming up. In the center.
So on the changes that would be needed in Greek legislation to name Turkey a safe third country, which will allow the operationalization of the EU-Turkey agreement, our latest information is that the draft law is ready to be tabled, and we expect it to be tabled for discussion in Parliament in the next days, if not tomorrow.
Follow up.
Okay, I understand that, but the question was more along the lines of, is it true that all the other EU member states are not called to go into similar action? Thank you.
For the operationalization of the agreement, we need Greece to name Turkey a safe third country so that the asylum claims can be declared inadmissible in Greece and therefore returned to Turkey. This is the focus of the operational work. More broadly, the EU-Turkey statement did contain a reference to the collective European opinion that this would be feasible for Greece to do.
Sorry, you were first and then Georgi.
Yes, also on migration, UNHCR announced to suspend certain activities at the Greek islands, saying that hotspots became detention camps. What's your comment on that, please?
The Commission is monitoring the situation in the islands and is working closely with the Greek authorities to find appropriate solutions that comply with the standards laid down in EU legislation, especially when it comes to vulnerable groups and unaccompanied minors. Cooperation and support from international organisations and NGOs such as the UNHCR are, of course, of crucial importance. And let me just remind you what EU rules say on detention. The Asylum Reception Conditions Directive and the Return Directive both contain the possibility to detain asylum seekers and irregular migrants. But of course, detention is only ever a means of last resort. And the Greek authorities are currently making use of closed reception centres in order to be able to monitor and eventually return irregular migrants or asylum seekers whose claims have been declared inadmissible.
Georgi? Oh, sorry, did you want to ask a follow-up? Yes.
Sorry, just UNHCR is mentioned in the conclusion of the EU-Turkey statement. Is the fact that UNHCR is now suspending certain activities having any consequences since it's specifically mentioned in the statement?
Look, our work with the UNHCR has always been primarily on relocation and resettlement from Turkey and relocation from Greece to other EU member states. We continue to pursue this cooperation. Commissioner Avramopoulos is today and tomorrow in Geneva at the UNHCR high-level pledging conference for resettlement, and he will be having bilateral meetings with Filippo Grandi, the UNHCR himself, and so our cooperation on these fronts continues in a very constructive spirit.
Now, Gary, it's your turn.
Yeah, on the same issue, it's not only UNHCR, but international NGOs such as Médecins Sans Frontières, Oxfam, who basically walked away from the hotspots, casting doubt over the legality of the EU-Turkey deal. I wonder if you have a comment on that. And also a second question. Italy considers that there is an increase of migrants going from Libyan shores toward Italy in recent days. Does the Commission have the same information, and what can you say about it?
On your first question, I don't have any particular comment other than to reiterate our stance on the legality of the EU-Turkey agreement, which I think we've made quite clear now. The agreement will, of course, only take place in accordance with EU and international law. People who apply for asylum in Greece will have their applications treated on a case-by-case basis in line with EU and international requirements and the principle of non-refoulement. There will be individual interviews, individual assessments and rights of appeal, and there are no blanket and no automatic returns of asylum seekers, which is what allows us to be confident that the deal is both legal and feasible in line with EU and international standards. On your second question, this is, of course, fragmentations of the route or a route going through Libya to Italy is something we're very much aware of and have never lost sight of in our management of the refugee crisis. That's why there's also a relocation program for Italy, why Italy has been setting up hotspots, and why we continue to monitor closely any new developments along the route. But our latest information in line with Frontex is there has not been anything to suggest that there is a significant increase along this route yet.
Georg, your follow-up, and then we move to you.
On NGOs, can you explain if the EU can do it alone without the help of the NGOs, if they consider that they cannot work under those conditions? Can the EU do it without Médecins Sans Frontières, without Oxfam?
What alone? Sorry.
Obviously, NGOs are assisting the effort of receiving refugees at the hotspots, and at least two NGOs have announced that they are going away from this. I would like to know if the EU can do it without the NGOs.
We are working closely with EASO and Frontex, EU agencies, and the Hellenic Asylum Office to assist in the registration of people who are arriving in the hotspots. And we continue to work with many NGOs, including the UNHCR and Médecins Sans Frontières, on the assistance of refugees, be it on the islands or in the mainland in Greece, or indeed in third countries like Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey. And we expect to continue that cooperation constructively.
Let me just move. So is it on the refugees? Yes. Go ahead, please.
Yes, it's on the refugees. Natasha, is there anybody who's actually sent back to Turkey these days? Are people being sent back? And aren't you worried by the number of people who are still reaching the Greek islands? There were 1,000 yesterday. So how is the trade between those who come and those who go? Thank you.
There has in fact been a sharp decrease in the number of arrivals from Greece to Turkey, which are encouraging. Less than 1,000 people arrived last week compared to average daily arrivals of 2,000 a day in previous weeks. In the meantime, returns of irregular migrants under the Greek-Turkish bilateral readmission agreement do continue. There were 76 irregular migrants returned on Thursday the 24th of March and 71 on Friday the 25th of March. So this is continuing, and at the same time preparations are underway to ensure that the returns of inadmissible asylum claimants can start in line with the resettlement of Syrians from Turkey on the 4th of April, and the Hellenic police and the Turkish authorities are holding discussions to finalize the operational agreement to that effect.
Thank you, Natasha. Now we move to you. Back to you.
Yeah, also for Natasha. So is your target date still April the 4th, I believe, to start the returns to Turkey? And just to Alexander, following up on the previous question, can you reveal the name of the person who died in the attacks?
I'll take the first one. On the returns, the return of irregular migrants is continuing and is already ongoing in terms of under the framework of the bilateral Greek-Turkish readmission agreement, as I just gave you the figures, the returns of inadmissible asylum claimants will start in line with the resettlement of Syrians from Turkey, and indeed the target date is the 4th of April.
Okay, I'm happy to give you the name after midday, no problem. Please, go ahead.
Wasn't there a commitment from Greece that this would happen by the 28th, by yesterday, essentially? And when we see what's in terms of the safe country designation, and when we see what's happening in the islands, obviously there's a pressure building, and you get, the longer it goes on, you get into circumstances where people's right is very problematic for people's rights. Shouldn't Greece have moved by now?
Look, we're working hand in hand with the Greek authorities. The EU coordinator, Martin Verve, who is the Director General in the European Commission, has been in Athens since last week to work with the Greek authorities to move this forward. The legislation is now ready and now needs to be adopted by Parliament. And as I said, we expect that in the coming days, if not tomorrow. So work is definitely ongoing, and we're moving as fast as we can.
Thank you. There was another question. Yes?
Apparently, Turkey has announced not to change its laws on refugees. An expert of the Commission was saying in a technical briefing that both Greece and Turkey would have to make change in laws for this agreement. Could you remind us which changes are needed? And if you have any information on the situation in Turkey about changing laws. And another question, do you have any information how many people are still experts, interpreters, and etc. needed in Greece, and how many arrived so far?
Sure. So on the first question, so there are changes needed in both Greek and Turkish legislation. We've just talked about the changes in the Greek legislation. In Turkish legislation, what needs to happen is the legislation needs to provide for adequate protection for refugees being returned to Turkey in line with the requirements of the Geneva Convention. For example, for Syrians, what this means is that they need to see their temporary protection status renewed once returned to Turkey. This was the commitment that Turkey undertook in the EU-Turkey agreement. The EU coordinator, Martin Verve, has been meeting with the Turkish authorities regarding these necessary amendments for the implementation of this agreement, and he will travel to Ankara this week to pursue those talks and hopefully conclude that soon. In terms of the pledges of experts, so there were two calls, one from Frontex, one from EASO. Frontex has so far received proposals from 19 member states for 47 readmission experts and 492 police officers. Then EASO has received proposals from 16 member states for 396 experts and 22 interpreters. 170 of those have actually been nominated, and so are starting to be deployed already now.
Georgi.
Natasha, can you give us an update on Idomeni, the camp in Greece near the border with Macedonia? We hear reports that migrants don't want to move from Idomeni, although the Greek authorities advise them to move to better facilities which are more far away from the border and closer to Athens. And also, are you aware that at least there are reports leaflets are being distributed advising migrants in Idomeni to try the Albanian route?
So, to our knowledge, as of yesterday, these are the figures I have from yesterday, there are still around 11,000 migrants present in the camp in Idomeni. And the work that the Commission is undertaking with the Greek authorities and Frontex is indeed to encourage people to move to proper reception centres where they will be provided with proper shelter, accommodation, and healthcare and other assistance that can be provided to them. Greece is working very hard to increase the levels of reception centres across the country, and it would be preferable, evidently, that people seek proper accommodation there, and then they can also have their asylum applications treated properly, and they may be eligible for relocation. So these are the efforts that we are pursuing. In terms of leaflets that smugglers may be distributing, I'm not aware of anything regarding the Albanian route. No.
Any other questions? Yes.
Hi.